The entire restaurant went silent the moment the man slammed his hand against the table. I said I don't want him touching my food. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. A little girl froze with her juice box in her hands. A birthday song being sung across the room slowly faded into uncomfortable silence. Standing beside the table, wearing a perfectly pressed black uniform and carrying a tray with remarkable steadiness, was 29-year-old Daniel Brooks. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply asked quietly, "May I ask if there's a problem with your order, sir?" The customer leaned back in his chair with a bitter laugh. "The problem isn't the order." He pointed directly at Daniel. "The problem is you." The words echoed through the restaurant. No one moved. Everyone waited to see what would happen next. What nobody in that dining room knew was that this single sentence was about to change far more lives than anyone could possibly imagine. Daniel slowly lowered the tray. Years of working in customer service had taught him something difficult. Some people weren't angry because something had happened. Some people arrived already carrying anger, simply looking for somewhere to unload it. His manager, Melissa Carter, hurried over. "Good evening, sir. Is there something I can help with?" The customer folded his arms. "I want another waiter." Melissa hesitated. "May I ask why?" "I don't need a reason." He leaned forward. "I pay good money to eat here. I should have the right to choose who serves me." Daniel noticed the customer's wife staring down at her napkin. She hadn't spoken a single word. Neither had the teenage boy sitting beside them. Only the man's voice filled the room. Melissa remained professional. "Sir, Daniel is one of our best employees. I'm sure he'll provide excellent service." I said no. His voice became louder. "I don't want him near my table." A woman at another table quietly began recording on her phone. Others exchanged nervous glances. Daniel could already feel every eye in the restaurant fixed on him. Yet strangely, he wasn't embarrassed anymore. Only tired. Very, very tired. Melissa pulled Daniel aside. "I'm so sorry." Daniel smiled gently. "You don't have to apologize. I've heard worse. You shouldn't have to." He nodded. "I know. But tonight isn't about proving someone wrong. It's about everyone else watching." Melissa looked confused. "What do you mean?" Daniel glanced across the room. "There are children here. They're learning something tonight. The question is, what?" Meanwhile, the customer introduced himself loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "My name is Richard Collins. I own 3 construction companies. I don't tolerate being told what I have to accept." Several diners looked uncomfortable. Others simply returned to eating. But one elderly man sitting alone near the window kept watching quietly. He hadn't touched his soup since the argument began. Instead, he watched Daniel, not Richard. Daniel noticed him too. The old man gave the slightest nod. Nothing more. Daniel nodded back. It seemed insignificant, but later, everyone would understand why that tiny gesture mattered. Melissa reluctantly reassigned another waiter. Richard smirked. "See, that wasn't so difficult." Daniel disappeared into the kitchen without another word. Inside, one of the cooks slammed a pan onto the counter. "This is ridiculous." Another employee muttered, "I would have quit." Daniel washed his hands calmly. "My father used to say, anger is contagious, but dignity can be contagious too." The kitchen became quiet. One dishwasher smiled. "I like your father already." Daniel smiled back. "You would have." Out in the dining room, Richard seemed unusually pleased with himself. He laughed loudly, ordered expensive wine, repeated the story to neighboring diners as though he'd won some important battle. His teenage son, Ethan, barely looked up from his plate. His wife still hadn't spoken. The silence between them felt heavier than the shouting that had come before. Then something unexpected happened. A young boy, no older than 8, walked over from another table. He looked at Richard with innocent curiosity. Mister, my mom says people shouldn't be treated differently because of how they look. Is she wrong? The restaurant became silent again. Richard stared at the child. His mother hurried over, apologizing. I'm so sorry. I'll take him back. But the question had already landed, not as an accusation, as honesty. Richard forced a laugh. Adults understand things kids don't. The little boy frowned. My grandpa says adults are supposed to know better. His mother gently led him away. No one clapped. No one cheered. But something invisible had shifted inside the room. For the first time, Richard looked slightly uncomfortable. An hour later, dinner was ending. Richard requested the check. The replacement waiter searched through the system. His smile faded. I'm sorry, sir. The payment terminal isn't recognizing your card. Richard sighed dramatically. Try again. He did. Decline. Again. Decline. Richard's wife quietly whispered, maybe use the other account. He frowned. I know what's my account. Another card. Declined. A few nearby diners noticed. Richard's confidence began cracking. This machine must be broken. Melissa checked. The machine worked perfectly. Other customers paid without issue. Richard's face reddened. This is embarrassing. Melissa spoke gently. We can hold the bill while you contact your bank. Richard immediately became defensive. Are you accusing me of not having money? No, sir. I'm trying to help. But he wasn't listening anymore. Then Daniel quietly stepped forward. Not because anyone asked him to, because he noticed something everyone else had missed. Richard's hands were shaking, not from anger, from pain. Daniel looked carefully. His breathing had changed. His skin had become unusually pale. Sir, are you feeling all right? Richard snapped. I don't need your help. Daniel didn't move. Instead, he noticed a medical bracelet barely visible beneath Richard's watch. Type 1 diabetes. Daniel's expression changed instantly. What did you drink tonight? Richard looked confused. What? The wine. Did you eat enough? Richard blinked. Daniel looked toward Melissa. Call emergency services. Now. Everyone stared. What are you talking about? Melissa asked. Daniel answered quietly. I think his blood sugar is crashing. Richard tried to stand. The room spun. His chair tipped backward. He collapsed onto the floor. Gasps filled the restaurant. His wife screamed, Ethan, help your father. Panic spread instantly. But Daniel was already beside him. Calm, focused, professional. What medication does he use? The wife struggled to answer. Insulin. Daniel nodded. Does he carry glucose tablets? She searched frantically through Richard's jacket. Nothing. Daniel turned to the bartender. Orange juice. Now, the restaurant suddenly understood something. Daniel wasn't simply a waiter. Years earlier, before family hardship forced him to leave school, he had completed nearly 2 years of nursing education. He had never stopped studying emergency care. Richard was barely conscious. Daniel supported his head. Stay with me? Can you hear my voice? Richard mumbled weakly. Daniel handed him small amounts of juice carefully. Not too much, just enough. Emergency responders arrived minutes later. One paramedic looked impressed. Who recognized the hypoglycemia? Melissa pointed toward Daniel. The paramedic nodded. You probably prevented a seizure. Maybe even worse. The dining room remained completely silent. The same people who had watched humiliation were now watching compassion. As Richard was loaded onto the stretcher, he finally opened his eyes fully. The first face he saw was Daniel's. Confusion slowly became memory, then shame, deep shame. He remembered every word he'd spoken. Daniel simply said, You're going to be all right. Nothing more. No lecture. No revenge. No satisfaction. Only kindness. Richard couldn't even meet his eyes. The next morning, clips from the restaurant had spread across social media. But something surprised everyone. The most shared video wasn't Richard's outburst. It was the moment Daniel rushed to save him. Millions of people commented. Some praised Daniel's professionalism. Others criticized Richard harshly. Daniel avoided reading most of it. He returned to work as usual because, in his words, "If strangers decide who I am, I'll spend my whole life becoming someone else." 3 days later, Richard walked back into the restaurant, not surrounded by confidence, not speaking loudly, not demanding attention. He carried only a small paper bag. The staff became tense. No one knew why he had returned. He asked quietly, "Is Daniel working today?" Daniel stepped out from the kitchen. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Finally, Richard took a deep breath. "I've rehearsed this apology 100 times. None of them sounded good enough." He placed the paper bag on the counter. Inside was the medical bracelet Daniel hadn't noticed that night. It had broken during the emergency. "I wanted you to have this." Daniel looked confused. Richard smiled sadly. "Not to keep. To remind me," he continued. "I've spent years believing strength meant never admitting I was wrong. But lying in that ambulance, I realized the person I refused to let serve me was the only reason I was still alive." The restaurant remained silent. Richard looked around. "I embarrassed this restaurant. I embarrassed my family. But worst of all, I embarrassed the values I claimed to teach my son." He turned toward Ethan, who had come with him. "I'm sorry," not just to Daniel. To his son, the boy's eyes filled with tears. For the first time, his father wasn't protecting his pride. He was protecting the truth. Daniel picked up the bracelet. He gently fastened it back around Richard's wrist. "It belongs with you." Richard looked surprised. Daniel smiled. "Not because you earned forgiveness overnight, but because I believe reminders work better than punishments." Richard nodded silently. Months passed. Something unexpected happened. Richard began volunteering with a local organization that helped people returning to the workforce after discrimination or long-term unemployment. Not because anyone forced him, because he finally understood what dignity looked like. Sometimes he spoke publicly about the night that changed him. He never tried to make himself the hero. He simply admitted the truth. "I almost lost my life because I first lost my humanity." Daniel eventually returned to nursing school. This time, supported by a scholarship quietly funded by dozens of restaurant customers who had witnessed that unforgettable evening. None of them asked for recognition. They simply believed compassion deserved another chance to grow. Years later, Daniel graduated as a registered nurse. On graduation day, tucked inside his pocket was a small object, not a medal, not a certificate, a simple medical bracelet. Richard had asked him to keep it after all. "It reminds me," Richard had said, "that people aren't defined by the worst sentence they've ever spoken, if they're willing to change." Daniel often looked at that bracelet before beginning a difficult shift. It reminded him of something even more important. Compassion is strongest when it's hardest to give, because anyone can help a friend. Character is revealed when we choose to help someone who first refused to see our humanity. Justice mattered that night, but compassion changed the ending. And perhaps that's the deeper lesson. Real karma isn't always watching someone fall. Sometimes it's being forced to live with the undeniable truth that the very person you looked down on became the one who lifted you up. What would you have done if you were in Daniel's position? Would you have walked away? Or would you have chosen compassion despite the hurt? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd genuinely love to hear what you think.